initially what I'd like to do is acknowledge the traditional owners of the country in which we meet, past, present and future, and thank them very much for us to have the opportunity to gather on such lands, to have such conversations. So I'd certainly like to acknowledge that as my first instance. Look, I'm going to talk to you as a strategic planner. I'm going to try not to be that boring, starchy traffic warden planner. Rebecca, well done. I think that was a great segue for me to talk to you. I'm going to break my presentation up into three parts. I'm going to talk about a changing world, because one of the things that we don't consider when we get very caught up in discussions like we're having today is that we don't necessarily stand back and look at this world and the way it's changing. I've never seen change occur at the rate it's changed in this world in the last 8 years. I find some of it very scary as a planner, and I start looking at the planning system and ask myself the question, does the planning system have the capacity to keep up with some of this stuff that's going on? And I think it's very important, if you do say to yourself, I'm going to get involved in planning, well, you need to understand this stuff. I'm going to talk briefly about the North Coast region. Rebecca's probably taken a fair bit out of that part of my presentation because it was very much statistics. I'm going to talk about the housing challenge. And then I'm going to talk about strategic planning, which is what I think is the way that we can actually respond to this changing world that I'm talking about. Megatrends. You may have read about this word. If you haven't, you need to. You need to pick up documents. You need to get on the web and start having a look at the conversations about megatrends, because these are the sorts of things that are shaping this world. And I'll talk individually about those. How on earth can you plan if you don't understand what's going on around things like this? Planning needs to analyse these future scenarios, inform decision-making around future land uses, how we respond in the land use scenario, at a national level, at a regional level, and down at a Shire level along the lines that Rebecca was talking to us before. A megatrend is a major shift in the environment, social and economic conditions that will substantially change the way people live. Once in place, they will influence a wide range of activities, processes and perceptions, both in government, society, and possibly this will go on for decades. It's going to be relentless as it comes through. It's worth thinking about the sorts of mega trends, the known unknowns, the discontinuities, the known knowns, the probability of certain things happening, and it's worth having this type of debate in your mind. Health and ageing, it's a known known. We know we're going to have an ageing population. What are the consequences? What are the sorts of things that we do around health and ageing? How do we adjust from a planning point of view? Our housing issues. How do we adjust our new jobs geography as we go forward with health and ageing? And there's the other mega trends which I'll talk about. More from less, planetary pushback, the Silk Highway, forever young, digital immersion, porous boundaries and great expectations. Our CSIRO organisation do as good a commentary on these mega trends as anybody. You can have the big end of town, the PricewaterhouseCoopers, KPMG, other organisations. But CSIRO categorise them under these 7 headings. More from less, increasing demands for limited resources. We currently consume the equivalent of 1.6 planets per annum. That's not sustainable. We can't keep doing that. When I talk to you about megatrend number 3, which is the Silk Highway, the interesting thing about the Silk Highway is the emergence of the new economies in Southeast Asia, the emergence of the new middle class. This is why I say think about consequential issues. The middle class in the OECD countries over the last 40 years was about 850 million people. 850 million people shape the clothes we wear, the cars we drive, the way we behave, the jobs, etc., etc. 850 million. It's predicted that in the next 35 years, the growth in the middle class in Southeast Asia is 3.2 billion. So if I've got it half wrong, that's still 2.5 times bigger. And if that demand on more from less were to continue the same way as the United States and countries like Australia have consumed, which is actually the equivalent of 5 planets per annum per head of population, then there's some serious questions that need to be considered. And as a planner, I'm posing those questions. What are the sorts of things that we're going to do? Planetary pushback. That's the loss of animal species. Unfortunately, we have the gold medal for the loss of more mammal species than any other continent here in Australia. That's not a proud statistic. It's something we shouldn't be proud of when we talk about the sophistication that we think we have when you do things like that. I had a very sad recollection 2.5, 3 weeks ago. I grew up in Kenya in East Africa. I had the privilege in about 1970 of accompanying a fellow called Guggersberg, who was a world's expert on rhinos. To have heard a story 3 weeks ago that the last male white rhino was extinct, I can only say it's disgusting. I can't add any more than that. I have a very passionate view on the fact that something so iconic, shared in nursery rhymes, shared in conversation pieces, as the white rhino, can be extinct in my lifetime. Anyway, I better move on. The Silk Highway. The issue here is this emergence of the middle class in Southeast Asia. That has huge issues and consequences when you look at some of the challenges I talked about, but it also presents huge opportunities. It presents huge opportunities to look at trade, look at commerce, look at things in a different way, look at jobs geography in a different way. When I talk to communities around New South Wales, they are already feeling the opportunities that are being presented by the new agricultural scene. New tourism conversations are taking place in different parts. New education opportunities are being offered. New medical opportunities are being offered. And more collaboration is presenting great opportunities. But it is something we need to think about. We need to think about the consequences. You'll be tickled by this one in this part of the world. Gold Coast Airport. It's not that far away from you. Coffs Harbour Airport offers opportunities. These are going to be issues that will test some of our strategic planning as we go forward. And then think about Forever Young. I think we've spoken about that already, but the incredible changes are likely to occur in terms of the percentages around retirees. Japan has a situation where 60% of its population in the very near future is going to be over 60 years of age. Think about the consequences of your taxation base, your employment base, your housing challenges. The planning system needs to think about those sorts of things as we go forward. Think about digital immersion, a phenomenal change which is occurring in this world around digital immersion and the ability for somebody to turn off their swimming pool pumps using their phone anywhere in the country, to check their mother's hearing aid in Melbourne by the connectivity that comes out of the digital side of things. It's a phenomenal change. Porous boundaries. This is another very interesting one because two factors, the internet and the connectivity from the technology and the connectivity through airlines, transportation, freight and logistics is making the world smaller. There's a fellow up in Brisbane, Toowoomba. He exports rump steaks now into southern China. Those steaks arrive there within 24 hours of leaving Toowoomba. Wow. It takes you 24 hours to get a rump steak from Toowoomba to Melbourne. The world has shrunk on the back of this interface between a new freight conversation, the internet, the fact that people order these things online and instantly a response comes from another part of the world. 3D printing. You would never have thought I'd talk about export around 3D printing. Someone said to me, we can export and transfer something around the world in 15 seconds. I thought, God, you're pulling my leg. They're not pulling your leg. You buy a program for a component part of something and you can print it off in another part of the world in 15 minutes because you bought it off of somebody in another part of the world. The scary thing about that particular tool is apparently that same printer can actually predict that a part of it's going to go wrong in the next 45 minutes, and it makes that part to replace in 45 minutes. This is this crazy, incredible world that we live in. And that's why I say to you as a planner, I need to understand, we need to have conversations about those things. And the last one is great expectations, a relentless demand for new, a relentless demand for new stuff, and it pounds governments, it pounds communities. The technology is always supposed to be there for the next solution. I just use this one as a quick example. I better keep going because it just helps illustrate the point that I was just saying to you. I have a young fellow who does some research for me back in the office, and I said to him, can you find out about lithium for me? And he said, oh, Gary, I'm doing a planning degree. I'm not doing a science degree. I said, understand that lithium batteries in the last 3 years have had an incredible effect, both positive and to some extent negative, across a whole series of areas. That diagram that I'm showing you there is the consequence of lithium batteries in the last 3.5 to 4 years. Imagine how that plays out in land use conversations as well. So what that did, it increased opportunities around robotics. Energy storage increased, artificial intelligence interfacing with machines that now have independence. Drone technology. 3.5 years ago, would we have been talking about drones the way we do today? CASA can't keep up with the regulations. Start to look at what farmers are doing. Start to see what meteorologists are doing. Start to see what mining companies are doing. Medical distribution companies around drone technology. So this incredible shunt effect that's coming out of that one piece of technology, which was lithium batteries. This is another, for instance, that this young researcher showed me. The 3D printing of a home means that a house can be constructed in 48 hours. I said to him, show me, I don't believe you. He said, well, that's the robotic arm that's been fed the plans. A soft concrete is manufactured and it's cut within a very short period of time into parts of that house. This was built in Sweden, 48 hours. So this is the opportunities that might be presented around technology and understanding some of these things. So the point I'm trying to make to you is understand what a mega trend, understand this changing world. How does it impact on your part of the world? What are the opportunities? What are the things that we need to do, both positive and negative, to understand those issues? Understand a megatrend, understand the technologies and how we must respond. The North Coast region, we have a vision now, we have a regional plan. New South Wales is the first state in Australia to cover the whole state with regional plans. This is a huge step forward because it is starting to tell a story across local governments, across state government departments, about going forward. It was part of a consultation process, and you can see there, housing choice is one of the prime building blocks of that regional plan, and Rebecca was talking about those sorts of things in her presentation. This is one that, it's that warning type conversation I've had with you already. That Pacific Highway will change the whole structure of northern New South Wales. It is already changing it. You only have to look at people who are investing in freight facilities in places like Grafton. This is a response to a piece of infrastructure that's gone in. This is going to influence many of the decisions that will influence your part of the world going forward. It's actually becoming that much easier to come from southeast Queensland down to this part of the world than it ever has before. And I'm not going to go through these because Rebecca did such a good job of all these statistics, so I'll go through these pieces very quickly for you. This will be available, so if you want to have a look at these to complement what Rebecca said to you. Buying a house, she talked about these issues. The housing challenges, we're talking about delivering greater housing supply, increased diversity and choice. Rebecca touched on that before. Just a personal view on housing issues, and I had a very interesting conversation with a fellow on the aeroplane recently, and he said, if you just increase the supply of housing, Gary, we'd sort out prices and all those sorts of things. I said, I'm sorry, I disagree with you. I said, one of the problems with housing, alongside the share market, it's the best investment product. So there's actually a contradiction between the notion of an investment product based on superannuation schemes that looks at property alongside the share market. You will hear that conversation every time someone talks about investment strategies. So there's actually a collision between the two objectives when you think about it. So I said to this colleague of mine, after about 3 glasses of red between Melbourne and Brisbane flying, I said, you have to positively interfere with the market if you're going to address some of the housing issues. And there are people who speak a lot better than me. The gentleman that'll follow will probably talk about how you positively interfere. But another aspect of the planning system that resonates with me, I was doing some work in Sydney with some major housing groups, and I found it very depressing when this very hard-working group of people said to me, Gary, we get worn out within 2 years sometimes. We put in housing applications for a variety of housing products. and we get worn down by the planning system. We get worn down by the gamesmanship played by people in the planning system. So in the end, we just don't go ahead. We're basically worn out. So I said, well, how much does that influence your stock? She said, at least 55% doesn't get built because of that brinkmanship. That gamesmanship that existing people living in houses are making perceptions about other people wanting to share in the same thing. She said 55% isn't there because of that type of brinkmanship within the planning system. We have to sort that out. And what Rebecca said before about if something aligns with your story, then get on and do it. Have that conversation. And I'll talk more about that later in my presentation. So delivering housing supply is only part of that issue. Understanding the demand, understanding the type of demand and the products that are needed, taking account of some of the issues I talked about before, health and ageing. What are the products that you look at? Rebecca talked about the number of houses, the number of bedrooms, and then she broke up the ratio of family numbers to it. Clearly there's a non-alignment between those sorts of things. Think about the supply and demand, but put it in the right perspective. These are statistics, again, that Rebecca would have talked about. We've got a strong focus in the regional plan that looks at Bellingen and Nambucca. So there is a conversation, there is an opportunity to populate into the regional plan the work that Rebecca talked about. One of the things that the government is clearly looking at the moment is to try and break that cycle of gamesmanship that comes into the housing process. So if a council has done its work, a council knows where it wants medium density to go, well, then if there's a simple code that can be followed, get on and deliver that housing stock. Don't put people through 2.5 years of further applications when you've already made up your mind that the complying development suits a particular area. Increased diversity, offer housing choice. It is one of the biggest issues across Australia. We've got people, one person living in 5-bedroom homes, 2 people living in 4-bedroom homes. We need to think very clearly and make sure our planning system gets out the way of addressing those sorts of things. Think about the missing middle, a whole variety of products. What's ironic about the debate that's occurring in Sydney at the moment is people are criticising the terrace house product. Go and try and buy a terrace house in Surrey Hills. That product is very sought after because of the characteristics and amenity of it. Let's look at certain things like that as part of a much more streamlined system. Housing affordability and housing, affordable housing, 2 different terms. Sometimes we get them both muddled up. The ability to have an affordable housing product is very different to affordable housing. It's important to understand the difference between those in terms of your lifestyle, etc. Now, in this changing world that I'm talking about, it's no good me having a rant and carrying on and etc., as a planner if I don't offer up an opinion and a solution to it. Strategic planning is a solution. It's looked after me all my life. What unfortunately we tend to do is pay very little attention to strategic planning. And I put together this diagram to represent that conversation. We have our battles on a DA by DA basis. Right. The battleground is on single development applications, not a development application for a use on a parcel of land, what it contributes to a place. That should be the focus. That's the strategic story that should be coming out of it. So let's put the effort, and this is what we've done, and I pushed very hard. I worked very closely with our minister to get the word strategic planning put back into our legislation here in New South Wales. Put the effort into that top storytelling that Rebecca talked about. Put the effort into the special things that you want as part of your plan, because the strategic planning amendments in our legislation now allow us to do that. Put in place the systems whereby we can deliver the right stuff quickly and we can punt the bad stuff out equally quickly because we've told a story in a strategic planning sense. We've refocused our planning system in New South Wales. We now have strategic planning in the legislation. We need to help the planning profession, with all due respect to my colleagues, become planners and not regulators. Because we've got ourselves caught up in a starchy act, react code. Can you understand how frustrating it must be to somebody when you look at something and they say, oh no, you can't do that because you're 1.5 metres too close to XYZ. but I'm on a rural block of land. What the heck does 1.5 metres mean? I had a gentleman send me something yesterday. I wish I'd have actually read it, but I haven't read it in detail. He was required to lodge a planning application to replace an existing pergola with a new pergola, because that's what the regulation said. I said to him, why didn't you bloody just get on and build the pergola and don't tell anyone? He said, well, I'm a planning consultant, so if I got found out... I said, okay, I understand, it's part of a business conversation. But that is just so stupid. But it even gets stupider than that, because he told me he had to put a traffic study in as well. And I said, why was that? And he said, well, previously I didn't park 2 cars under the pergola, I now park 2 cars. I thought that was absolute nonsense. He sent me the material last night. And that's not what planning's all about. I better get back onto my presentation, otherwise I'll go. But there's those opportunities. But a number of years ago, a Director General said to me, it was soon after the global financial crisis, and he said to me, it's you bloody planners that are causing the problem. I said, I take exception to that. It's the planning system that we've been asked to implement that's the problem. Let's have good strategic planning. Let's tell the story. Let's have properly calibrated application systems in place. So the stuff you want, you get there. The stuff you don't want, you boot out the back door. Let's have contextualisation. Let's have a regional plan that tells a story about where a shire sits, that tells a story about where a town fits, that tells a story about where a village sits in a strategic sense. And then start to align your conversations around infrastructure. Strategic planning is future orientated. It's not that rear vision mirror stuff that I was talking about before. And strategic planning is not complicated. We make it complicated. Strategic plan is storytelling. Rebecca was saying that to us when she was talking. It's a story about where you've come from. It's a story about what your values are in a particular part of the world. It's a story about where your place is heading if you do nothing. If you do nothing, do you like the consequences of doing nothing? So you can have one situation where your population declines, the economic base of a shire changes by doing nothing, or alternatively, you tell a story about the future. What do you want to be? What is your vision of the future? What is the action plan? What is the way you behave as a community to shape the place that reflects you, your values, your part of the world, not somebody else's part of the world? This is as good as any model if you're interested in having a look at a very simple interpretation of what I've been saying to you. The Oregon model was developed by people in Oregon, as you'd expect, but it was a response to a very spooked community around change. They said, how can we manage this change? And they actually developed up this model, which asked those questions in a structured way. Where are we now? Community profile, statistics, value set. Where are we going? Trend analysis, just extrapolate forward. That's a single scenario. It might be the scenario you don't want because when you extrapolate it forward 10 years, it could be a place you don't like the look of. What is the vision that you want to be in the future? What is the housing vision for your community? What is the profile of your community that you want? What is the action plan that's necessary to do that? And then how do you work the journey and check you're going in that direction? That is strategic planning. That's why I became a planner. I did not become a planner to be a regulator. Regulations are only part of a planning system. They are not the planning system. So where is the place heading? First step of a strategic plan answers those questions. Where does a place want to be? Step 2, deciding what change is necessary. How will we get there? Make those conversations and have them. And visioning is a great planning process that can deliver a plan for us as part of that process. Correct calibration was that second circle I talked about. The stuff that aligns to your story, let it slide through. Let it go through the process. The stuff that offends your story, the square block in the round hole, you stop it. You can legitimately argue because it doesn't represent your story. It doesn't represent the views of this community articulated through the sort of process Rebecca was talking about. That's why it's so beneficial to participate in that process. That idea of applications, the stuff that aligns is no risk because you've told the story. The stuff you want, you should know about, so you don't have to put it through those round pegs. The low-risk stuff, you might want to test it, Again, Rebecca made that comment because you might just want to see if it aligns. The stuff you don't want, get rid of it. But you've got the legitimacy for doing that. Contextualisation is that issue about understanding the world, understanding what the regional plan offers up, understand what the regional changes. I mentioned the Pacific Highway before, and then understand how that affects your local government area, how it affects a particular township like the one that we're in today, how it might affect a particular site. That is good strategic commentary around planning. Understand that strategic planning is that storytelling that informs the statutory planning. My passion for getting the word strategic into the legislation last year was because we operated almost entirely in the bottom left-hand side of that diagram. We didn't have the storytelling. I've got a unique situation in 3 weeks' time. I've got in conversation with the Chief Judge in the New South Wales courts because over my career, a lot of people have said it's the lawyers that make it overly complicated. Well, the lawyers thrive on complexity. There's no doubt about that. If you've got a complicated planning system, the legal system will thrive on it. But equally, if you have a planning system that tells a story, don't underestimate a judge's ability to see and go through these issues. Now, you can just imagine if you're sitting in a court and you hear a bloke get up and start talking about noise issues, diatribe noise issues, and engineering issues, and then we've got other issues. 15 consultants on that side of the fence. And then we have the other side, 15 of exactly the same. You've got a judge in the middle trying to do a matrix analysis of all these different arguments going forward. At least if it's a strategic planning statement, the judge can see why a community, why a council acts in a particular way. And they will uphold these sorts of conversations. Local strategic planning statements, this is what we put into the legislation last year. It talks about the local character. It would talk about the housing strategies unique to your particular local area, the housing typology, the infrastructure, and job types and distribution. Don't forget that one, because these mega trends will influence jobs. If you have a job, that influences your housing ability. Understand the emerging economy around the service sector, the opportunities it presents for us. Understand how a piece of the puzzle further down relates to it. So if I do a strategic planning statement, this is just an example of how easy it is. I can describe that shape to you in a strategic planning sense as it's important in planning lingo. I'm talking about a particular locality that has a significant environmental area. It's characterised by a town in the middle. It's characterised by 2 employment sectors, and it's down by the coast. I'm telling a story about this particular place, and you can do that for every one of these. That story then starts to talk about a particular township and how that township needs to be protected as part of the process. How even a parcel of land or a main street wants to behave in the context of those places. So storytelling is very beneficial in terms of that, and we get infrastructure alignment from it as well, in terms of the sorts of things council, the state might want to do. So the new legislation, I think, does present opportunities around this story. So I do think we have an opportunity here in New South Wales to have a far more competent planning system that equips us to handle some of that stuff. Look, I've taken you through this stuff at 100 miles an hour. I know what it's like in a hot room. I hope it's helped you see things in a different way. I'm very optimistic about the opportunities presented around strategic planning. And to have Rebecca say what she said, totally unsolicited, in the context of what I've said to you, I think plays out in terms of the opportunities going forward for this part of the world. So thank you very much for your patience.